The wind prowls through Pembroke Castle, rattling shutters, clawing at the mortar between stones. Torches gutter in their sconces, spitting wax and smoke into the night. Somewhere within, in a chamber heavy with the scent of tallow and fear, a girl grips the sheets until her knuckles pale. She is 13. She is in labour. Candles sputter, their light stretching shadows over rush-strewn floors. The air tastes of iron, of sweat, of rosemary pressed into cloth against infection. Voices murmur in Latin, prayers hurried and low, as though heaven itself might be listening for the outcome. Her name is Margaret Beaufort. Barely grown, yet bearing England's uncertain future. A womb conscripted into politics, her body both cradle and battleground. She is a child, and she carries a king. From these bloodied sheets will come a dynasty. From whispered chapel litanies to steel ringing on battlefields, her life will stretch across England's fault lines. Motherhood will be her weapon. Faith her armour. Strategy her survival. Before dawn breaks, one cry will change England. But the scream that came first never stopped. Long before the labour pains, before Pembroke's winter wind, Margaret's story began in bloodlines inked on parchment. She was a Beaufort, descended from John of Gaunt, son of Edward III, and from Catherine Swynford, his mistress-turned-wife. Legitimised by royal decree, yet always suspect, the Beaufort name carried both privilege and peril. A family close enough to the throne to be useful, never far enough to be safe. Her childhood was not her own. At 6, her marriage prospects were already weighed in council chambers. At 9, wardship meant her guardians changed with the king's favour. Margaret's days measured not by toys or ribbons, but by contracts sealed in wax. Each clause a reminder that her body was a political tool waiting to be claimed. England itself mirrored her fragility. A weak Henry VI presided over a kingdom splitting apart. Nobles sharpened swords under banners of red and white roses, Lancastrian loyalty against Yorkist ambition. Margaret's innocence collided with the reality of ambition and fracture, her girlhood hemmed in by whispers of civil war. Yet there were glimpses of childhood, a girl trailing her fingers across garden hedges, laughter caught on the wind, and then, abruptly, the image shifted. Her name pronounced in a council chamber, parchment passed across a table, a signet ring pressed into sealing wax. The child's ribbon replaced by a marriage contract. For Margaret, power was not a choice but a burden inherited. Every prayer she whispered was shadowed by strategy, every lesson in scripture edged with survival. A marriage is arranged, a door closes, another, darker, opens. The match was swift, decisive, and sealed by power. Edmund Tudor, half-brother to the king, claimed her hand. His brother Jasper stood beside him, guardians of a Lancastrian cause rooted in Welsh soil. To them, Margaret was not a girl but a key, her Beaufort blood unlocking claims that could steady or shatter a throne. The wedding came cloaked in ritual Margaret scarcely understood. Latin vows echoed in the chapel, sonorous and binding, though their meaning slipped through her as unfamiliar syllables. She repeated them because she was told to, because a child's voice could be made to sound like consent. Marriage was no sanctuary. It was consummation without pause, without regard for age or fragility. Inscribed with duty, bruised by necessity. Each night was another clause enforced by flesh rather than ink. Edmund was not cruel, but he was unyielding. He believed in the future he had secured, a son who would bear both Beaufort blood and Tudor ambition. Yet even as Margaret's days blurred into prayers and confinement, Edmund rode away. The country convulsed with war, and duty called him from the bridal chamber to the battlefield. She counted the passing days by the letters that never arrived. Each candle she lit in the chapel was for his safety, but the silence pressed heavier than faith could lift. The shadows of war crept closer, louder, until even the wind carried whispers of armies moving through the valleys. The message comes at night, rain on cloaks, mud on boots, and it brings no comfort. The news came with mud still caked on the messenger's boots. Edmund Tudor was dead, captured in Carmarthen, felled not by sword but by sickness, or so they said. The truth was tangled, but the consequence was certain. Margaret, 13 and pregnant, was a widow. Jasper Tudor, his brother, stepped into the breach. Duty pressed upon him, to safeguard the unborn heir, to guard the fragile vessel carrying Lancastrian hope. He found in Margaret not a grieving child, but a quick learner, eyes sharpened by loss, her silence layered with calculation. Winter tightened its grip as Jasper ordered the move to Pembroke. The journey was a trial of endurance. Margaret jolted in her litter, every rut in the road echoing in her bones. Rain turned tracks into rivers, swollen fords swallowed hooves, and the cold bit deep into marrow. Each mile was an ordeal, each prayer a bargain for survival. The physician's verdict was whispered in chambers, heavy with candle smoke, her hips too narrow, the child badly positioned. Ancient texts gave little comfort. Women had died for less, and Margaret knew it. Faith steadied her, yet fear laced every moment. Fear that her body would fail, fear that God might test her through fire rather than deliverance. She reached Pembroke under skies the colour of iron. The sea wind howled against the battlements, carrying the taste of salt and storm. Within the fortress walls, preparations began. Herbs gathered, towels boiled, midwives summoned. A birth approached, as dangerous as any battlefield. Labour begins on the battlements, where the sea wind speaks of storms. The chamber thickened with smoke and scent. Lavender to calm, rosemary to cleanse, iron tang of blood already in the air. Midwives moved like shadows, hands steady, eyes grim, their murmurs clipped with urgency. Margaret lay small against the expanse of bedclothes, a child consumed by a woman's ordeal. Time unravelled. Hours stretched into an endless blade, sharp and merciless. Sweat soaked her linen shift, her cries muffled against clenched teeth. Each contraction tore through her, a reminder of the wager between life and death. Beads slipped through her fingers, prayer after prayer, the clicking sound like the ticking of a fuse burning down. At last, a wail split the night. High, thin, insistent, the cry of a newborn. The room exhaled, relief flooding in a rush of movement. The infant lived. England's uncertain future had drawn its first breath. But Margaret was silent, her body torn, fever licking at her skin, her face pale as candle wax. She drifted on the edge of consciousness, hearing voices dim and distant. A physician's quiet verdict circled the room like smoke. Another child was unlikely. This one birth might be her only. In that silence, something hardened. If her body could not bear many, her mind would bear the weight of destiny. The child named Henry would not only be her son, he would be her cause, her crown, her justification for every sacrifice yet to come. If she cannot be the mother of many, she will be mother to a cause. Widowhood did not end her usefulness. Another marriage was arranged, this time to Henry Stafford. He offered stability, estates, and a measure of protection within Yorkist England. For Margaret, it was less a union of hearts than a truce with circumstance. She wore the title of wife again, but her true role was student. She studied relentlessly, accounts balanced with precision, statutes memorized, clauses recited, letters copied until her hand cramped. She mastered the ledgers of her estates as others mastered swords. Where men sharpened steel, she sharpened strategy. Chapel hours deepened her resolve. Faith no longer the soft devotion of a girl, but the armoured certainty of a woman who had survived childbirth's brink. Henry, her son, grew under Jasper Tudor's guardianship. Margaret's love for him coursed through couriers and coded letters, each dispatch a lifeline, each seal pressed with more than wax it carried her will across miles. Letters crossed seas faster than armies, if placed in trusted hands. Beyond her study, war raged. At Towton, snow turned red with blood as banners of Lancaster fell, and York's dominion spread. The map shrank, counties lost, friends scattered into exile. Margaret watched England change, borders redrawn not by rivers but by swords. She adapted, she endured. The estates became her realm, scripture her law, and Henry her unbroken thread of hope. If she could not hold the crown, she would learn to wield influence without it. When the map runs out, exile begins, and with it, the long game. The boy slipped away under grey skies. From Tenby's shore to the sea beyond, Henry Tudor's exile began. 14 years stretched ahead, measured not in calendars but in tides. Each wave carried him farther from England, yet closer to destiny. Margaret remained. Her survival demanded compromise. She married again, this time to Thomas Stanley, a man of calculated neutrality. He offered little warmth but immense leverage. His cavalry could tip the balance of kingdoms. Margaret accepted the bargain. Influence over comfort, strategy over solace. The wheel of fortune turned. Edward IV died suddenly, leaving sons too young to rule. Two boys vanished into the tower, their silence echoing through the realm. In the void, Richard of Gloucester seized the crown, thunderclouds gathering over his reign, plots flared like sparks, each quickly stamped out. Margaret's name surfaced, her loyalty suspect, her movements watched. She was punished, contained within walls meant to silence her. But silence was never obedience. She whispered in code, passed letters through trusted hands, wove networks that reached across the channel, never quiet, not when rebellion failed, not when allies fell, not when hope seemed ash. She bided her time, her son's name spoken in secrecy, her faith unshaken. England trembled on the edge of decision. One landing could change everything. One field could crown or kill. One choice, made at the hour of reckoning, would end her waiting. One landing, one field, one choice at the hour of decision. Dawn broke over Milford Haven in August 1485, grey light spilling across wet sands. Henry Tudor stepped ashore, banner unfurled, a foreign exile now returned as claimant. Each mile inland carried him closer to fate, the weight of a crown he did not yet wear pressing upon his shoulders. At Bosworth Field, the kingdom's balance hung in the mist. Richard III charged, steel flashing, the crown within his grasp. The Stanleys lingered, their allegiance veiled until the final heartbeat. Then Thomas Stanley's cavalry wheeled, their thunder shaking the earth, their choice sealing Richard's doom. The king fell, the crown was plucked from mud and placed upon Henry's head. Victory demanded marriage as well as battle. Henry took Elizabeth of York to wife, binding red rose to white. Silk veiled the sutures of a wounded nation, yet beneath the pageantry lingered scars of blood and betrayal. And Margaret? She emerged not as queen but as king's mother, a title heavy with influence. She built colleges, patronized learning, shaped a court with her quiet power. Her strategies, honed in chapel and council, endured into peace, as surely as they had in war. Yet the cost was written in her body and her memory. The scream that began at Pembroke had never stilled, only transformed. It carried through years of prayer, plotting and sacrifice, an echo behind every triumph. England remembers a king. History remembers a rose. Listen closely, and you can still hear the girl,